Hello and welcome into another edition of the Sun Devil Source podcast presented by Jones Auto Centers. I'm your host, Jacob Brooks. Alongside me, as always, is our Sun Devil Source publisher, Chris Cartman. And for this episode, Sun Devil Source staff writer, Luke Lendler. Chris, Luke, how are you guys doing today?
Doing great. Loving the bye week and trying to get familiar with this basketball team and going to be at hockey this weekend. So there's still a lot going on. How about you?
I'm doing good. Like we were talking about earlier, excited about sleeping in with no bye week. When we were at basketball on Tuesday, Luke was like, "Man, I got to wake up for practice tomorrow." I said, "Luke, there's no practice tomorrow," and that was the happiest I've seen him in weeks. So, Luke, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. That, just like you mentioned, Jacob, that moment was probably the highlight of my week. But I'm also a huge basketball guy, so I'm very excited that college basketball in general is rolling around. I think this is one of the best sports times of the year with the NBA getting going and college basketball getting going and the NFL and college football kind of ramping up to the important parts of the season. So certainly lots for sports people to be interested in.
Well, yeah, so like Chris and Luke alluded to, this episode is going to be a little bit different. We're not going to be talking Sun Devil football. We're going to be talking Sun Devil men's basketball. The first game of the year already happened with ASU defeating Southern Utah 81-64. This is going to be our season preview episode, and we wanted to do our season preview after the first game of the year because this is kind of an unprecedented season for Sun Devil men's basketball. 14 new scholarship players. Many fans and reporters alike came into the season not really knowing what to expect from this team. So we wanted to give it a game, kind of see what we could take away from that before doing a formal season preview. So before we can get into what we took away from that game against Southern Utah, Chris, there's a myriad of injuries that this team has been dealing with. What can you tell fans about the injury situation for this squad?
Yeah, certainly more than typical for the beginning of a season. They had a exhibition game against Texas A&M a couple weeks ago, and VJ Wallace, who was a junior college transfer guard who was expected to compete for a starting job, suffered a pretty gruesome injury when he fell and landed awkwardly after a dunk attempt and dislocated his ankle, and he's out for the season. The second most serious injury appears to be to one of their European big transfers, Jovan Isatovic. That looks like that's going to be a months-long injury, potentially leg issue, knee issue. And then they also did not have in the season opener Noah Mayosin, who's a guard from Belgium, who's was expected to be. It took him to Big 12 Media Day. He's expected to be competing for a starting job when he comes back, but that's not going to be for a few weeks, according to Bobby Hurley. And then a couple of other players who are going to be counted on a lot were on minutes restrictions in the opener. And that's Marcus Adams Jr., who was their top ranked transfer coming in from Cal State Northridge. He's a combo forward. He had a foot injury that had him on the shelf for about 6 weeks. He just got cleared before the opener. It didn't really look like he was in tip-top shape. That's going to take a while, I would say, for him to be able to get back to near 100%. He's trying though. And then Alan Mukeba is in sort of a 6'7" center / power forward who's their big physical imposing type of a rebounder and interior player who's also been on a minutes restriction coming back from a little bit of an injury. He looked like he was further along to my eye than Adams did. So that's a lot that they're dealing with. And we'll see some of these players over the next coming games begin to play more minutes and or return to action, with the exception of, I think, the first two that I mentioned.
Yeah, Chris, a lot of injuries. And before we get into the three of us, our biggest takeaways from the game against Southern Utah, it's important to point out the context. Like I mentioned earlier, 14 new scholarship players. ASU was picked to finish last in both the coaches and media poll for the Big 12. And we're entering the 11th season of the Bobby Hurley era for Sun Devil men's basketball. So a whole lot going into this season, that people have their perceptions of the team heading into the season. But through one game, I want to get to what our biggest takeaways from that game were. We're going to go Luke and then Chris, and then I'll go after both of you. Luke, what do you got?
Well, the style of play was just very drastically different to what we saw last season. And I think that's what really stuck with me during and then after the game when I was leaving the arena. It was a very open, free flowing style of basketball. Pepperdine transfer Mo Odom was kind of the conductor to the orchestra, kind of guiding everybody around him and along. This team is full of European players, like we've talked about. Some of them are already out injured, but others are still playing. And you kind of could see that in the way that they played. Maybe not with the most vertical athleticism outside of a couple guys, but with a team that would had savvy footwork, savvy passing for the most part, wanted to spread the ball around, not a very selfish unit. Hurley talked about in his Monday presser on his availability before the season started, his week of practice before the season started, that he felt like this team was really coachable. And then in his post-game press conference, he said, I was coaching with a free mind. I could put 4 guys in and take 4 guys out, and they wouldn't care. They wouldn't give me issue. I didn't have to worry about the repercussions of my decision. And I think comparing that to what last year's team was, not only on the court with a pretty stagnant, slow, isolation-heavy style of basketball that seemed to kind of rely on BJ Freeman or Bashir Jihad or Alston Mason hitting either a bailout 3 or Jaden Quaintance cleaning up an offensive rebound for its main source of offense. This season seems to be a little bit different in terms of how this team is trying to generate open shots, especially in transition, and just trying to maybe play free-flowing. That will obviously work against opponents where ASU can dictate the tempo of the game like Southern Utah. Will it work against opponents where ASU might be playing catch-up? Could be, something to be seen.
Yeah, 7 international players, and you could feel that. You could see that. Like the game is played differently overseas. A lot more, passing and moving without the ball, and players that have a broader range of skills. I would say just generally is what I noticed. Like they had bigs that could pass the ball and dribble it. And Mo Odom, as Luke said there, he's a different type of a playmaker than Bobby Hurley's probably had at any point in time in his tenure. And when you had 14 new players, I just sort of thought, okay, the chemistry is going to be an issue and they're not going to really look like they play well together and have a good feel for one another. But on the offensive end, that wasn't the takeaway. I thought that they shared and moved the ball, and it looked like guys got along well with each other, which they seemed low maintenance, and there weren't a lot of like chuck and duck bad threes. I really only 1 3 that as I was watching it, I was like, that's a bad shot. Usually I felt like that every few minutes in recent years watching the Sun Devils. So I thought there were a lot of positives, and at the same time, the talent level overall, broadly, isn't what you would expect from a top half of the Big 12 roster. And even Bobby Hurley alluded to that when he said in the preseason press conference a couple weeks ago that this team doesn't have as much upside, perhaps, as last year's team. But he seems to be more at ease. Luke's reference to his comments about just like not feeling pressure or looking over his shoulder or worrying about the way that minutes distributions are going or substitution patterns or how much guys are in the game. I think that is a very positive sign about the chemistry of the team and their ability to play cohesively.
And
Yeah.
I do just want to say, I thought the body language was something that stuck out, to me throughout much of the game. Even when Southern Utah was making runs kind of back into it in the second half, when ASU, at one point, Southern Utah dialed up a full court press out of a timeout, and ASU, I think, turned it over once and then kind of struggled to get the ball across and had a couple clunky offensive possessions. I think a season prior, we would have seen finger pointing. We would have seen hands on hips, hands kind of flipping up at each other. Like, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? But this team, even Odom wasn't even on the court for half of this. kind of collected itself, got itself together, literally huddled. ASU didn't do a lot of that last year. This team literally huddled at the free throw line, which a lot of teams in college do, figured out the way to beat the press, and then went on a 12-2 run and basically put the nail in the coffin. And I think that was a pretty good moment, representative of the differences that this team has to the season prior. Sorry, Jacob.
It's okay, man. For my biggest takeaways, honestly, I feel like you guys really hit the nail on the head in terms of my biggest takeaways were the coachability and then also the chemistry. One thing that I also really noticed just from being down on the baseline was how active guys were off the ball, not just in terms of movement, but in terms of communication. There were a lot of times last year where, for people who don't know, I usually end up having to sit like in the corner, like near that corner pocket for a corner three. And there were a lot of times last year where I'd be sitting there and it would be like BJ Freeman or someone in the corner just standing there. He's just kind of standing there and I'm not hearing a thing. Now, in one offensive possession, there are probably 2 or 3, maybe even 4 different players who end up right in front of me during that one possession. And all of them are there for a quick second. They're talking, they're communicating, then they're running to somewhere else on the floor. That was something that, kind of like to Luke's point right there, was very drastically different compared to last season. I think that was probably the biggest positive takeaway, was the chemistry and the ball movement. There was one play that Chris and I referenced in our post-game show where Mo Odom had the ball at the free throw line from the opposite side of the court, and it led to a dunk for Masamba Diop with 4 people touching the ball within the span of like 10 seconds, and nobody dribbled. It was just pass, hockey pass into Diop, and he dunks it. That was the type of play where you didn't really see a lot of that last year. So that would be my biggest positive takeaway. My biggest negative takeaway from the game would just be the sloppy play that you kind of alluded to there, Luke. There was a couple moments where myself and some of the other fellow videographers were looking at each other down on the baseline like, let's just delete the last 2 minutes of footage that we just took, because that's just unusable footage. That was kind of a vibe that I felt like was being felt too often when you're playing against an opponent of the caliber of Southern Utah. There were moments where there were passes flying out of bounds. There was like 3 straight possessions where ASU just couldn't get anything going on offense. And I feel like that happened a little bit too often against an opponent that is not going to be as good as the Big 12 opponents that ASU is going to have to face. And Bobby Hurley was open about that in his post-game presser. He said that the water is going to get deeper and the mistakes that were made against Southern Utah are going to get amplified against other teams. So I'm interested to see if that aspect can improve. But like you guys were saying, I left the game overall feeling a little bit more positive about the team than I felt heading into the game. And with that feeling, 2 players that we kind of alluded to but wanted to save some of our analysis on were Mo Odom and Masamba Diop. Were probably the 2 biggest impressors for the 3 of us and also many Sun Devil fans who were watching that game. So I want to lead with Odom. Luke, what did you see from Odom that impressed you in the opener?
Odom looked exactly like the guy that I watched probably way too much film on in the offseason about that ASU brought in from Pepperdine, and looked exactly like the guy that I watched in the WCC tournament last year when I was telling my friends, like, look, Pepperdine can make a run here. This Odom guy is pretty good. And I, of course, had to back up my take, watch the tournament. Pepperdine went to the semifinals. Odom had 30 and 10, 3 straight games. They lost to, I think they lost to St. Mary's. They lost to one of the heavy hitters in the conference in the semis, but upset a couple decent teams along the way. He's the first name to hit ASU in the transfer portal. And my immediate thought was, this guy's an upgrade at point guard. And then sure enough, that seems to be the consensus around ASU camp, around the fan vibe, and just what a lot of people seem to be thinking is this is probably one of the better point guards Hurley's ever had. And I think it's pretty funny that this guy that suddenly is bringing all this attention also played high school basketball in New Jersey, right where Bobby Hurley played high school basketball. I mean, these 2 players are pretty similar in terms of how they played the game. Odom is really, really skinny. It stood out when we were even sitting up from like the press pit area. You could see how skinny he was, but he gets the job done. Very tight handle and very, very good passer, such that there were a couple plays where ASU's bigs weren't even expecting the ball. You got to keep your hands ready when Mo Odom's going to throw you a pass, because you might not know when it's going to hit you right in the hands or right in the chest. His passes were weighted pretty well. He never threw his passes seemingly too hard or too soft. There wasn't a lot of coaches always called them lollipop passes, where you kind of drift it from one side of the court to the other. Those weren't really happening. And Odom, I thought, did a very good job communicating on the offensive end and kind of getting players into sets. ASU doesn't run a lot of sets, but the ones that they were running, Odom was kind of directing traffic. Sunk a couple threes. That's all you're going to really ever expect from him. He can fill it up. He's shown at Pepperdine that he can score a lot. But he's really a pass first player on this team, and he passes pretty well for a pass first player. And I was pretty impressed with his performance, his communication. And this is a guy that could average just as many. He averaged 7.5 assists last year. I think he could average 7 point. I said, Chris and I were talking about this at the game. I said 7.1, maybe a slight decrease because of the increase in competition he faces. But given the lack of other primary ball handlers on this team, Odom is really, I think, going to be the driving force for a lot of what ASU does offensively this season. And I was impressed, but it was also what I expected to see. But my expectations of Odom were pretty high. So he really does play. He plays like somebody from New York. He plays like somebody from the East Coast. He has a lot. There's a little bit of swagger to his game and a little kind of bounce. He talked about it in his press conference before the season. He said, I wanted to stay on the court when I was growing up. Like, I was playing outside. I was younger than everybody. I didn't want to have to wait because I might not get back in the court. So I played hard and I made people like me. And you make people like when you're a point guard, everybody's going to love you when you can thread a pass through 3 people and put it right on their hands for a dunk. And I could tell that's how he grew up playing, because that's kind of how he plays in college too.
A lot of East Coast propaganda from East Coast guy Luke Lindler.
I'm spreading it because this guy, like, you can tell he plays like somebody who had to pass to stay on the court growing up. He plays like somebody who's played point guard with a capital P and a capital G his entire life, with always had his teammates in mind, and he clearly is one of the leaders of this team. Again, how he can handle the physicality of what lies ahead, and if his defense can kind of be hidden enough, will again remain to be seen. But in terms of what he put on display on Tuesday, I was pretty impressed by what we saw.
Totally agree. Bobby Hurley's had some pretty good point guards, Remy Martin, Trey Holder, and others. I don't think any of them had the natural playmaking, feel, vision, creativity, passing skill that we got a glimpse at with Mo Odom last night. I would even go further than that and say I've been watching ASU basketball 30 years now, and I think he's one of the top 4 or 5 playmaking point guards that I've seen in that span. ASU's only had 2 players have more than 200 assists in a single season. Marcel Capers did that in 1994-95. That was a special season. ASU made the Sweet 16. And then Alan Lewis, for not nearly as good of a team, had over 200 assists in 1998-99. So we haven't seen a player really threaten that this century. And I think that we're going to see that from Mo Odom. He was 4th in Division I in assists last year at Pepperdine. And I think he demonstrated that he's capable of carrying that over to a large degree as a Sun Devil. If he averages like fewer than 6 assists per game, I think that'd be kind of a surprise. And so that tells you right now, ASU plays 30-ish games. He's probably going to, if he stays healthy and the season goes as we would expect, he has a chance to be one of the top 5 or better single season assist guys in ASU history. I think Bobby Hurley was a creationist, the all-time leading assist guy in Division I history for his career. Not a great athlete, wasn't blowing by people, wasn't a great shooter, wasn't a scorer, but he didn't need to be in order to be one of the best point guards in college basketball history and get an opportunity at the NBA level. Pretty clearly, Mo Odom is an average at best athlete. He's not a run and jump athlete. He's not going to go dunk on people, probably not going to finish a high percentage in traffic around the rim. And he made 3 out of 5 from 3. That's great. He's probably going to be an average or maybe a little bit above average 3-point shooter. But man, he's going to create and take advantage of pick and roll situations and kind of just sift his way into around the basket and draw double teams and drop the ball off and create dunk opportunities, lob opportunities, hockey pass opportunities for 3-point shots that probably at a higher clip than anybody since maybe Derek Glasser was able to do that at ASU when he played with James Harden and Jeff Pendergraph. It was a really great point guard. So I was extremely impressed. And I think that, given the expectations of ASU this year, the point guard position is where you need somebody who can help you overcome a lot of the talent disparity that might exist elsewhere on your roster, or experience and those things in some combination, right? And I think that Odom has the potential to be able to make the whole better than the individual pieces on ASU's team.
Yeah, I agree. And to me, some of my biggest takeaways from Odom didn't even come from the Southern Utah game. It came from the preseason availability that we got a week before the season. We were able to sit in, we were fortunate enough to sit in for 20 minutes of ASU men's basketball practice. And ASU was just running drills, running 3-man weave. And the guy who was far and away the biggest talker on the floor was Mo Odom. He was on the floor when Trevor Best and Santiago Truitt were out there. He was like, go guys, come on, like speed it up. Like, we're good. Keep going. Like Bobby Hurley was telling everyone like, hey, like don't give up before the buzzer is sounded. And like Odom was reflecting that. He was like, come on guys, like we got to be putting in the effort. Like we want to be like, he was by far the most vocal guy on the court. And I think that, like you were saying, Chris, that's what this team needs when you have a talent disparity like that. And the other takeaway is that his pass first mentality that Luke was talking about is genuine. He was asked about that at that preseason availability presser. Why are you so pass first? What do you seek from it? And there might be some guys who are like, oh, like I'm good at passing. I'm trying to pad my assist numbers, or I'm trying to do this and that. His answer was very unique. And I've never heard a player have an answer like this before. He said, everybody's family is watching the game. I want them to watch their son score. To me, that's cool. That's a cool mentality for a player to have. And then he went out against Southern Utah and he did just that. Something that we talked about on the post-game show, Chris, that was pretty funny, was that some of ASU's turnovers were from guys straight up not being ready for Mo Odom passes that ended up going into the stands because they didn't realize that he was like that. It was like they haven't played a Division I basketball game with a point guard who can find them in that type of way. They weren't expecting the ball. I guess the places that they were at before just didn't have a passer like that. So I think he's a very unique talent. And I think that the concerns that Luke was talking about with physicality and defense, I noticed there were multiple times in the game from my angle where he would fall after getting bumped into, and then he came up just kind of grabbing his ankle a little bit, like a little bit of a stinger. And over the course of a long college basketball season, if you're falling that often, if you're not able to hang with the physicality of the Big 12, I worry about that a little bit. I would say that's probably my biggest concern with him. But like you were saying, Chris, he's such a unique talent in terms of his playmaking that I think it could really elevate this squad. And another guy who, like we were talking about, Sun Devil fans were very, very impressed with that could elevate this squad is Masamba Diop. Want to just let everybody know it is Diop, not Diop. We received the pronunciation guide from the team themselves. So Masamba Diop is how it is pronounced. Diop was really, really impressive. I know, Luke, you've been big on him for a long time. I'll let you talk about how he reminds you of one of your favorite players. What did you see from him? Because as I'm going to get into later, I was very, very thoroughly impressed.
Yeah, well, Diop does not have the conventional path to get to Arizona State. He's one of the European guys. He initially hails from Senegal, but he played with a Spanish side. He came up in the Real Madrid Academy, but then once he turned like 15, kind of fell out of favor, fell out of order in that pyramid, which is, I'm sure, extremely cutthroat. Went to a different club and kind of worked his way through the ranks, dominated on their B team, and then put up relatively average numbers on their A team this past season. Hurley went and got him, brought him over. He's very, very skinny. He's very skinny. But he's tall. Like, his skinniness kind of makes him look even taller than he actually is. He is like a good 7'1". He's not somebody that's 6'11" that you write 7'1" next to his name to intimidate people on the box score. He is 7'1". He's got long arms and big hands, and he walks in the door and has a high defensive floor because of that build. He showed really good defensive feel, I thought. You see a lot of guys with that, you could say, inexperience at the D1 level, at the level of American basketball, fall into foul trouble early and often. Job had 1 foul, which I didn't even realize until I was literally looking at the box score 20
I
minutes
didn't realize
ago.
that either.
And
Wow.
that surprised me. I was like, okay, because that makes sense, right? We saw him block a couple of good shots. We saw him get beat off of, a couple of lousy closeouts where he kind of threw himself at the shooter, and then of course the shooter pump fakes, goes right by him. So kind of chopping his feet and keeping his offensive player in front of him as a defender will be the next step to his defensive game. But as a rim protector, he showed very good chops and discipline and feel kind of for how to see shots, alter shots. He had, I believe he had 2 blocks. He had 3 blocks. And he also, I feel like he altered a lot of shots too. He was forcing guys to go up and around and miss wildly. So for him, again, rebounding is going to be the biggest part of his game. I felt like often he would get tangled up or tied up with one guy and would kind of struggle to rebound through contact. ASU has the size to, especially against I almost call them Power 5, G5 or G8 or however many non-power conferences there are in college basketball. Against those kind of teams, ASU should dominate on the boards. It did not against Southern Utah, and that's because I thought its weak side of rebounding was particularly poor. That wasn't really Jop's job. He was on the strong side most of the time. But then again, he should be able, with his height, to fight through contact, rise through contact, and pull down rebounds. Again, that's something he can work on. On the offensive end, I mean, he just moves really well for a guy his size. He knows where his feet and his hands are at all times. You'd be surprised how many guys are built like him and don't know where their feet and their hands are at all times. Sean Phillips was a former very highly regarded recruit who, personally, watching him for multiple years, I never felt like Sean Phillips always knew where his feet and his hands were on like every single possession. He didn't have very good hands. He couldn't catch the ball very well, and it seemed like he would kind of travel every time he touched the ball. That is not a problem with Jop. He showed some nice drop steps, some nice pivot moves. He had a good, nice little shuffle pass to Gribovich on a backdoor cut that was wide open. Those 2 European players hooked up on that play. And I got to say it, I've told everybody, he reminds me a lot of Kansas Joel Embiid. Obviously, I'm not calling him an NBA MVP and one of the better scorers of a generation, but I think the way he moves and how he's built and what he has shown at his age reminds me a lot of that kind of archetype of big, a guy with good defensive feel who will walk in the door as a plus defender, who has a lot of offensive skills he could polish, but has a nice baseline in terms of his finishing, in terms of his movement. I mean, he pulled down a rebound, looked off Odom on the outlet, dribbled coast to coast, and laid in a finger roll. There's not a lot of 7-1 guys.
The clip I got of that was crazy.
There's not a lot of 7-1 guys that can do that. And so for him to do that was very impressive. Then again, for all the good, there was bad. He did not have a consistently good game on Tuesday. There was some plays where he really kind of left something to be desired, could have been in a better spot offensively. He's going to get called. Oh my goodness. He's going to get called for an illegal screen about 4 times in the next game. The amount of illegal screens he set and got away with was pretty ridiculous. He was always shooting his hip out to kind of knock the defender off of Odom's path. The 2 wouldn't ever rub shoulders. And it was kind of driving me a little bit crazy because I'm thinking that's just such an undisciplined play. But that's something that you generate with, time together and all that kind of stuff. So there are things Jop can clean up, but the baseline and the floor, I think, was a lot higher than a lot of other guys in his position. If you mean to tell me ASU and Bobby Hurley brought in a 7'1" big man that has never played in America before, that hardly played for the A team of his European club, I would not expect him to look as good on day one that Masamba Jop did. Obviously, there's a lot to go. He's still probably not even a top 45, 50 big man in the country right now. But what he showed on Tuesday was very, very encouraging and farther along than I expected him to be.
Did you leave anything out?
I tried my best not to.
Okay, good.
You can nitpick what I said, Chris.
No, look, I largely agree with what you said. Really good hand-eye coordination and movement skills for a 7'1" big. Like, that's really uncommon. And ASU's had some very high-profile bigs in recent years. Enoch Boache was like a 5-star borderline. Jaden Quainance was a 5-star, top 10, top 15 overall prospect in his class. Sean Phillips was, really raved about by coming out of high school, and then by Bobby Hurley for a couple of years. And Masamba Jop, to me, was more impressive than any of them, like as a prospect. And he's not as far along, probably, even though he's a good defensive rim presence and shot blocking, not probably as far along in that respect, that one single respect, as what we saw from Jaden Quainance. But overall, I think he's further along than Quainance. He runs the floor. He has a sinewy, gazelle-like ability to kind of move and run, but do it with a coordination. He plays above the rim. He seems to know how to receive and get rid of the ball quickly when he feels double teams and things. He's got his head on a swivel. He's like seeing what's going on. There's a developed sense of basketball here that I think a lot of people don't really have as freshmen coming in. And that, I think, reflects well on his development over the last several years playing in Spain, and also reflects quite well on Bobby Hurley and his staff's ability to go out and get a guy that looks this good. And he's also, for somebody who moves really smoothly, he's also got some sort of a twitch to him where he can, he gets off the floor, rim, does a good job protecting the rim, shot blocker, high flying sort of dunk ability. Yes, he's going to have to get stronger. He's going to have to play with a lot better body angles and feel for rebounding. He's going to have to box out and be savvier in that respect, because ASU gave up a lot of offensive rebounds and a lot of paint points. Those were really big problems in that game. But this dude is actually kind of lighting up the internet right now for his debut, being super impressive. And I would just say, like, as a prospect, it's hard for me to imagine, if we were to look at all the centers across the country, that there's more than 10 or so centers who have as much upside as this guy does. Like, he might even actually be threatening the top 5 for freshman centers with the most upside across college basketball this year. Like, I don't think it's even close that he looked like ASU's best professional prospect in his debut. And if you have a center like this who can handle P&R situations, pick and pop, and I think he seems to have the ability to shoot the ball somewhat out to the stripe, or at least, you have to defend him, you have to hang with him. There's a lot that you can do with him, and having a guy like that playing alongside a point guard like Mo Odom, that should bode well to their prospects this season.
Yeah, I don't want to go on for too long about him because I feel like you guys touched on it perfectly. But for me, the the biggest thing that I saw in terms of upside on offense was just how multidimensional he's going to be able to be. ASU is going to be able to have multiple different offensive identities with him on the floor. He can dominate at the rim in the way that Sun Devil fans saw Jaden Quainance maybe do last year, but he can also play on the outside around that 3-point arc in a way that Sun Devil fans could not see from Jaden Quainance last year. There were times last year where when Quainance wasn't getting involved in actions or he wasn't getting called up for that high pick and roll, he was just kind of standing there on the block and you were like, okay, what is he doing? Hopefully he gets an offensive rebound or something. Whereas with Jop, he plays with that overseas style that Chris talked about. I mean, that little like handoff that you talked about, Luke, that moved me. Like, I was like, whoa, I didn't know that was coming. Like, I was unfamiliar with your game. I didn't think you could do that. That was tough. And also just his feel around the rim. Like the big dunks were what will go viral on Twitter, and like that was cool. But he also had great feel just with those close shots, knowing when to kind of duck and like get under and then get the easier angle for a layup, as opposed to just trying to rely on brute strength or brute size to just leap up and expect a foul. I feel like he has a very large amount of finesse for somebody his size. And I agree with your guys' takeaways about the upside that he could have. To kind of switch gears a little bit and look at a more slightly negative aspect of the team, biggest question that we're leaving the game against Southern Utah with in terms of the Sun Devil men's basketball team. Luke, I'll go to you first. Outside of all the positivity, what did you leave the game thinking? I'm not so sure about that with this team.
I mean, to me, it was, how is the forward? What is the forward rotation going to look like? And second, how is it going to help Jop on the boards? Because ASU struggled rebounding the ball against the Southern Utah team that it should not have struggled rebounding the ball against. Like I mentioned, Jop is tall, Jop is not wide, and Jop did struggle a little bit in the rebounding game. Alan Mukeba, they brought him over from Oakland. he is very well built. Chris and I were talking about this on like the first day of practice. You look around, he's one of the only guys in that team that looks like built for the Big 12. Like he's kind of a gentle giant. He's pretty quiet, it seems, but he is jacked. Like he can definitely bang around inside. But is he good vertically enough to help against to help with handling these explosive athletes that they're going to see in the Big 12? I'm not so sure. Gribovich looked okay, looked a little slow kind of, and couldn't really turn the corner defensively. He seemed to struggle sliding in help and getting in front of drivers. And that was something that kind of weakened ASU, especially on the back end of its defense. Again, what we see from the injured guys when they come back and how they're worked into the rotation will be kind of a talking point for how Hurley's going to play his rotation. How big Hurley's rotation is going to be was also something I thought about leaving the arena, because he played a lot of guys last night. You know, he let a lot of people get tick, but there's players that you're probably not going to see a lot of that could play themselves out of the rotation. Trevor Best was here last year. I don't know if he's going to play that much again this year. He just kind of seems to play the same position as Odom, and he's not tall enough to play the two. And the way Odom plays, you might not see Best on the court that much. He could be a guy that plays his way out of the rotation. Anthony Johnson looked great though, but again, he's 6'2". Like this team is short in the backcourt, so the forward rotation is going to have to do a lot. Marcus Adams looked, like he was coming back from an injury. He looked slightly out of shape, like he was coming back from an injury on a minutes restriction. So how impactful can he be? Because he didn't look. There's a lot of Adams, Bashir, Jihad comps in the offseason in terms of the position they play and the style they have. I expected Adams to move better than Jihad on day one. Watching the game, he didn't look like he was moving much better than him. Then again, coming off of a foot injury on this minutes restriction. So I think there's a lot of unknowns in this forward rotation, but what ASU has to figure out, and Hurley talked about finding the culprit, which was kind of, I felt like an Italian mob boss was going after me when he was saying, we're going to look at the film and find the culprit about who was giving up all those offensive rebounds. They're going to have to figure out how you manage that weakness on the boards, because Jop is developing his strength, but is not there yet. And they're going to have to help him a lot on that end.
Yeah, look, ASU started 3 guys 6'11" or taller: Jop, Gribovich, Truitt, and still somehow gave up 16 offensive rebounds to a Southern Utah team that will be in the bottom 25% of college basketball teams this season. So Hurley was pretty frustrated about that. And then that aspect enabled Southern Utah to score a lot of points in the paint. Like 44 points in the paint is an extraordinary number to give up out of Southern Utah's 64 team. What you should be trying to accomplish is locking up the interior, preventing second chance opportunities, and forcing teams to shoot the ball at a high rate from 3 in contested situations with good closeouts. And ASU didn't do that. So even with playing a lot of size, like a lot more size than Southern Utah had. So defensively, this can't be considered a good performance, even though Southern Utah only scored 64 points and shot 37% from the field, partly because there was a lot of rim protection, shot blocking, shot altering that happened, and also partly because Southern Utah is just not very good. Mm-hmm. So ASU is going to have to do a better job of not allowing guys to break them down off the dribble, not allowing passes to get onto the interior, better communication, better defensive rotations, and you got to wall off that painted area as you go up against better teams, especially because ASU doesn't have a lot of those Big 12 big thick bodies that you're going to want to bang around in there other than Mukeba.
Yeah. For me, the biggest questions and weaknesses that I noticed from that game, the first one was the point that both of you guys mentioned, the physicality in that preseason practice that we were able to attend. Luke, you mentioned that conversation that the 3 of us were there for. We were just kind of looking around the court and we were like, okay, who can hang in the Big 12 in terms of physicality? And then in the press conference, the 2 players that we got to speak to were Mo Odom and Alan Mukeba. And Mo Odom was asked about who was physically imposing on the team. He looked at Mukeba and said, "Him, bro," and that was it. He didn't have any other answer. It was
he
just
did the thumb. He literally did the pop thumb meme.
Yeah.
He didn't even say it. He just pointed at him, and everyone in the room laughed.
And then Mukeba was asked about it, and he was like, yeah, me," and didn't mention anybody else. So you look around the court, and you have a lot of those stockier, skinnier, 5-out archetype guys like Jop and Santiago Truitt, and I feel like having those guys can work if you have really stout perimeter defenders that are tough. If you have, I'll shout out an ASU guy. If you have a guy like Lou Dort on the perimeter that can hold it down, you can get away with having stockier big men. But when you have perimeter defenders like Mo Odom that are also kind of skinnier, scrawnier, smaller in their own right, in relative comparison to people at their position, that's a bad combination in terms of giving up points in the paint and offensive rebounds. And that was what was exactly on display from Southern Utah. The other thing that I kind of left viewing as a weakness or a question is when you get into those key Big 12 moments, I don't know who I trust on this team right now to go out on an island and get you a bucket. The Mo Odom 7 seconds or less, fast pace, swinging the rock ball is fun to watch, but outside of Anthony Pig Johnson coming off the bench and delivering 17 points, I kind of was left in moments where I was like, look, if teams are schematically coached well and very prepared for this Arizona State offense, and you have to go off game plan and you have to rely on a guy to get you 25 to 30 points to scrape out a win, you get him the ball and you get out of the way. I don't know who that would be on this team right now.
I think Odom showed last year that he could do that at the mid-major level. The question is, will it transfer against Big 12 defenders?
And I don't know if it does.
Exactly. Anybody watching, listening to this, do me a favor and go turn on Odom's tape from the Gonzaga game in the second half last season, because he took over. Really bad first half. He was one of the reasons they were down by 20 at halftime. Turned the ball over a lot, missed a lot of shots. But he came out of the break and he was getting buckets on Ryan Nembhard, who is going to go play in the league this year, and a very good college point guard. And Odom was giving him everything he could handle and more. And was one of those guys that wanted it in the moments late in games. But again, can he do it against? Sorry. Can he do it against defenders?
Dude,
you're good, man. You're good.
Jacob, you're killing me. Can he do it against defenders that are also can he do it against multiple league bound guys is going to be the question, because he did it very well in multiple games against WCC guys and even performed well against Gonzaga. But night in, night out, like you mentioned, well-coached, well-schemed teams will say, hey, y'all got to go like this. Y'all got to call the ISO and somebody's got to come and get a bucket. And right now, Odom, maybe because of what he did last year, I agree, there's really nobody else that I would be confident in not only wanting it in the biggest moment, but being able to deliver in the biggest moment.
I also think that goes back to the point that I had with Odom about wear and tear. If you're playing in a physical Big 12 conference and you're getting little stingers here and there every single night, are you capable of shouldering that offensive load of being the number one generator and potentially the number one scorer for a Big 12 offense? That is a question that needs to be answered. But on the flip side, in terms of what we saw as a collective unit, the three of us on Tuesday at that game, what do you guys think can be some of the best aspects for this team this year?
Probably, if everything on this team breaks the way it could break, and I'm not saying if other teams get hurt, if ASU plays the best basketball ASU can possibly play, 15 or 16 wins, maybe in the middle of the Big 12. It would mean they would be very, very good at home. And again, that's kind of in my opinion, very unlikely scenario.
You're skipping ahead, though. You're skipping ahead. This is just what are the best aspects?
Yeah, what were the best aspects?
Not your prediction. Your prediction will come later.
Well, we're saving that for the end. For the end.
So the best aspects of this team are still their ability to play in transition. It's everything. I don't think they displayed anything on Tuesday that wasn't something that could be a theme for them going forward this season. The way they played in transition, the way they moved the ball, and the speed at which they moved the ball, it wasn't like it was pass, catch, hold for 3 seconds, pass, catch, hold for 3 seconds. Guys were making the defense move. They were forcing the defense to rotate, and it got a lot of weak side looks open for bigs. Bakeba had a couple dunks. Diop had a couple dunks. Wing play is something that could end up being good as guys kind of get back into the system and kind of get back into game shape. But what is kind of the defining parts of ASU's identity right now are the guys wearing 5 and the guys wearing 35. It's Modem and Masama Diop. They both looked good. The way in which they played with each other, the speed in which ASU played offensively were certainly things that I think could carry over for the rest of the season.
I agree. Mostly, I think when you have Mo Odom, you're going to be good in transition, and also you're probably going to have an answer to how teams handle your ball screens, like whether they're playing blitz or drop. Like you're gonna have, with the ball in his hands, he's gonna make good decisions, and then other people are gonna have to do their part around that. And there's but I a lot of times I felt like ASU hadn't really no answers for how teams were attacking ball screens. And I think that this team has a better chance to be successful against that. And so I think those two things are probably the biggest positives for their prospects this season.
Yeah, for me, one of the biggest positives that I saw is kind of on the contrary of one of the negatives that I was talking about. I talked about when you have like the stockier big men on the defensive end, that can be a little bit of an issue. But I think on the offensive end, I think ASU is going to be able to have some unique offensive performances throughout the season when you can have a guy like Diop who can catch the ball out on the 3-point line and be a playmaker while also being a scorer in that situation. It's not just like kind of like when you see with the Warriors when Draymond gets the ball out there and he's just standing there looking to pass to someone. Like you're not going to see that from many guys on ASU's roster. It feels like there are a lot of different lineups ASU can put on the floor where they can run 5 out. They can run lineups where everybody could be a potential threat. I don't think that anybody, like we were talking about earlier, is like the ISO get out of the way type of guy. But if you can run a lineup where all 5 guys can be a potential threat around the perimeter to be a playmaker or a scorer, I think that can be one of the biggest strengths for ASU. And I think that this is a team that we're going to see get into a lot of high scoring games throughout the season. When you have a Mo Odom ran offense that has a lot of taller guys that can also do stuff off the dribble, and then you have the defensive weaknesses that we talked about. Another thing that I think was kind of a strength was the depth. That's something that Chris and I talked about on the post-game show. Is it feels like, and whether you view this for better or for worse, there isn't a humongous gap between like the average talent level of an ASU starter right now and an ASU bench player right now. It feels like this is a team that we could see a lot of lineup fluidity throughout the season. We could see guys earn a starting spot, lose a starting spot. We could see, hey, Bobby Hurley telling them, look, this is a very specific matchup. We're going to bring these 2 guys in, these 2 guys out. He talked about how he was able to coach freely. They probably would hopefully receive that well based off of that answer that Bobby gave us. I think that this is a team where depth could end up being a strength where you can have lineup flexibility. I mean, the leading scorer against Southern Utah was Anthony Pig Johnson off the bench with 17 points. I would say a lot of ASU fans didn't expect the leading scorer in the season opener this year to be somebody off of the bench, but that's just kind of the way that ASU performed. So I think that the chemistry that we saw, potentially depth, and then also 5-out offense would be some of the best aspects for the team this season. Now we can toss ahead to what Luke was getting a little excited to jump into, the anticipation, the speculation. What do you guys think are the ceiling, the floor, and then also just your overall expectation for what this team will do this season? We talked about best points, weaknesses, questions. Let's bring it all together. What do you got?
I mean, I think your point about the depth is very sound and is important to how this team will do over the course of the season. We saw last year, guys got knocked out with injuries and suspensions, and suddenly I had to put in articles, and Chris was sending out tweets that ASU has 5 scholarship guys today. ASU has 6 scholarship guys today. Like, that was a legitimate trend that happened at the end of the season. They went on the road and played Oklahoma State, and Bobby Hurley Jr. was 5th on the team in minutes in that game. because they only had 5 or 6 scholarship guys, and 2 guys got in foul trouble early. That was a legit problem for the team last year that I think there's a lot of parity on this roster in terms of talent level. They run 8 or 9 deep of guys that you could really swap and interchange, and I think that could aid them late in conference play when those injuries really take over. But I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. You look at their non-conference schedule, there are a lot of matchups there where if they beat the teams they should beat and lose to the teams that they'll probably lose to, you're looking at 7 or 8 non-conference wins. And then the question is how many conference wins will they have? They get 4 games they get 2 against Colorado and 2 against Utah, which I don't think either of those teams are particularly good. They get West Virginia at home, who was in its first year under a new head coach, and ASU did beat them last year. They didn't actually end up making the tournament last year, even though that was a ranked upset for ASU last year. ASU will always kind of find its way to seemingly win like one random conference road game. They beat Kansas State by 15 last year in a game where Jaden Quaintance tore his ACL, and I was pretty surprised by that outcome. At the end of the day, as highly as we want to talk about Jop and Odom and this team's depth, the talent level and the league in which it plays are really just going to hold back, I think, this team from cracking 500. I mean, I think literally every possible thing breaks right, and the competition plays a lot worse than ASU might expect, and then it might break 500. I think it would be really hard for this team to break 500 in the league that they play in, based on the competition they face, based on the fact that, they go to Maui, they got to play a couple pretty good teams in Maui. So they got to play Gonzaga. Santa Clara is by no means a win. That's a very difficult mid-major to play. They gave Odom fits last season at Pepperdine until the WCC tournament rolled around. So I guess on the high end, this team, again, 14, 15 games on the high end. On the low end, it's 6 games, 7 games. I'm being dead serious. It's 6 or 7 games on the low end. And then I think it will end up being somewhere in the middle. 9, 10, 11 games is probably around where they will finish. If you had to ask me, I'd probably say 11, maybe 12. It depends on how many they win. It depends on if they can avoid upset in the non-con. Could they beat a team like Oregon State? Can they beat Oregon State at home? Is that something that this team has in it? We'll have to see. Again, still a lot to be learned about this squad, but I would probably go with 11 or 12 wins. And then obviously that has implications for the future that we'll get to.
Luke, did you say 6 or 7?
See, this is what this is going to happen.
I was avoiding that
every single time before I say, if I'm saying guy's height, I literally have to say, by the way, not trying to clip farm, he's 6'7". It drives me crazy. See, and y'all there. I'm the youngest one here. Y'all are adults cracking up. Look at me, stone face.
You're an adult too, bro.
This is unbelievable. Y'all laughing at these
the
jokes.
Ones who brought that into source. Was that me who brought that into source? That was.
I don't know what you're talking about. That was definitely not me or anything.
Well, that was definitely Luke at Camp.
All right.
You definitely said a lot of words there that I would not really disagree with. ASU is probably going to end up somewhere between 8 and 15 wins, and who knows how that goes. We said a lot of positive things about the team, and that being said, at the same time, the Big 12 is a fantastic conference with a lot of great teams, and the schedule is extremely difficult. And ASU is going to have to outperform what we think, based upon what we've seen to this point in the opener, to be a above 500 basketball team, and to be to challenge to be an NCAA tournament team. It would have to have a extremely rare and unexpected level of success to accomplish that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the ceiling for this team, I'm not even necessarily looking at it from a wins perspective. I think if I had to place a number, I would say 10 wins on the season would be my middle ground official prediction. But I think the ceiling for this team, if we're talking ceilings, is just the team being fun, the team being a stark contrast from last year, the team being a squad where Sun Devil fans a couple months into the season are genuinely excited to go watch a guy like Mo Odom. They're genuinely excited to go watch a guy like Job. And Desert Financial Arena is actually getting filled with fans in a way that didn't really happen against Southern Utah, and in a way that didn't really happen towards the back end of last season with the frustrations that ASU fans had with Bobby Hurley and the team as a whole in its entirety with all of the situations that were going on. So I would say that is my ceiling of the squad. I would say the floor is the talent just completely collapsing from underneath it. I think that you can't look too deep, even though that's exactly what we did on this podcast episode. You can't look too deep into performances in the non-con slate, because you go into Big 12 play, the water gets deeper, like Bobby Hurley directly said in his press conference, and you can fall down a slippery slope in a hurry in the way that ASU did last year. So a floor would be just a really, really bad season with only 5 or 6 wins on the year in totality. And that is a possible outcome. But I was moved by the positive takeaways that we saw on Tuesday night. And I think that this team's going to end up winning 10 or 11 games and have a lot of fun to watch contests, maybe playing close, high-scoring games that maybe it doesn't end up winning against teams that it probably shouldn't be in a close game with, and just kind of be that fun, feisty team is kind of the outlook that I have.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I would just say we all can probably agree that from the opener, our belief in the team was increased a little bit. Like,
yeah, correct. I would agree.
They probably improved their over/under projected win total by like 2 games. Like before the game, maybe 10. After the game, maybe 11.5 or 12. If we're looking at it, would be roughly, or maybe from 9 to 11 or something like that. But
yeah,
in that general range, you're not gonna. We can't have ASU fans expecting this is going to be a 500 or better team in the gauntlet that is the Big 12, but also this isn't a season where you just like don't watch for the next 4 months and then revisit in March to see who the next coach is going to be.
So to that point that you just made, Chris, that was going to be our final topic to wrap up the episode. As I mentioned at the outset of the episode, 11th year for Arizona State under Bobby Hurley, ups and downs. A lot of Sun Devil fans were clamoring for his firing at the end of last season. That did not happen. Graham Rossini and ASU's athletic department decided to let Bobby Hurley play out this final year of his contract, but he has not received an extension. That obviously played a large factor in the talent and players that ASU was able to acquire throughout the portal and throughout recruiting. With the uncertainty surrounding the program, a lot of people wanted to look the other way. That's probably a large factor as to why guys like Jaden Quaintance and Joe Sansanin chose to leave Arizona State. What is your expectation based off of the predictions that we had for this season? I'll go to you, Luke, first, and then Chris, of what Bobby Hurley's future at ASU looks like.
I think it's going to take a lot more than a yay, everybody's having fun, even though the team's not very good kind of season for him to keep his job. I mean, they could literally move on from him after the season without suffering any financial repercussions. That was one of the main motivations in bringing him back for one more year, was not kind of burning any money on a buyout when there's other places that money can be spent. Now he's got 1 year left. He's got a lot to prove to get that contract back. I mean, this team has literally never won a first-round conference tournament game. A first-round NCAA tournament game. He has been at this school. This is his 11th season. They've made the tournament a handful of times. They've won a couple first 4 games. They've never won a first-round tournament game. This is a Power 4 school. The standard kind of has to be higher than that. And so I think it's going to be really tough for him to keep his job after the season. He's going to have to show that not only can he get more out of a squad with less, there has to be confidence about him in the future. There has to be confidence about him building towards the future for him to get that kind of deal. Bobby Hurley was hired in a much different era of college athletics than ASU currently finds itself in. Bobby Hurley has shown, to be completely honest, little growth and evolvement and evolution in how he has coached, and how he's obviously this year was very much like, okay, we've never seen this from Bobby before, going overseas, getting these guys. This is potentially a step in that direction, but it could also be too little too late to keep his job. I mean, it's hard to put like an actual like thing he has to do to get there, put a check on the list. He probably has to go to the tournament or at least be in the conversation on Selection Sunday to have. But again, I don't think that's what's most important. I think what's most important is, would the athletics department have trust in him moving forward as a head coach? And would he want to move forward as a head coach at this point in his career? I mean, Bobby Hurley is not young. His son is on his staff. You know, there's probably some part of him that kind of wants to see his son potentially get into coaching. Not suggesting Bobby Hurley III would be the next coach at all. That's not what I'm saying. But his probably wants his son to stay in assistant coaching. Hurley could maybe also fall back into some sort of role. It's going to end up being, does the ASU athletics department think Bobby Hurley is the right man for the future, not the present, the future? And I think it would take a lot, both on and off the court, for that athletics department to think that. And so I think I would not place it a very likely chance he gets extended. Even if this team wins the 15 games, even if it wins that high end that we're talking about, I would still consider it to be pretty unlikely.
Yeah, it's you got to make the NCAA tournament or be pretty close to that for this to even be a conversation at this point, in my opinion. Like, we're not in a show progress in year 11 with in your last year of your contract situation. Like, that's not what this is. So it would be nice if Bobby Hurley showed progress for himself and what that can portend to for potentially his coaching future. But it's show and prove season for the Sun Devils this year, and they're going to have to do better than what any of us think is going to happen for us to be talking about this situation in a few months. Like, yeah, good chance that Bobby Hurley's back at ASU next season.
Yeah, I think for me, even if ASU exceeds our expectations, what I see as the most likely outcome if ASU hits that quote unquote fun ceiling that we were talking about is ASU is a fun, competitive team. The roster sees a lot of turnover, and Bobby Hurley goes off into the sunset just on a better note with Sun Devil basketball fans than he was at last year. The athletic department decides, look, we still want to go in another direction, but people can acknowledge that, hey, Bobby Hurley had an 11-year tenure here, and he went out on a season where we enjoyed watching the product that was on the court. We appreciate what he offered to this program. We all understand that it's time to move on. I also think that there's a reality where even a month into the conference slate, the athletic department is going, hey, we know this is what is going to happen at the end of the season. I think the only way that I could see him salvaging his job would be a tournament appearance cooped with ASU getting some high 4, potentially even 5-star recruits to say we are confident in what Bobby Hurley is building and we want to come because of him, not because of a bag or not because we want to play with a guy like Jop or something like that, coming because of him. And in that scenario, I would still only see him getting like a 2-year extension where the leash is extended, not them bringing out the Brinks trucks for face of the program, Bobby Hurley. That is the only outcome that I personally see. I think the writing's on the wall. I think that he knows that based off of all the press conference answers that he gave us at the games we covered at the end of last season, in the preseason this year. I think
not getting extended.
Yeah, not getting extended. So that's where I'm at with it. I think that'll do it for this podcast episode previewing ASU men's basketball season, as well as talking about how our perceptions may have changed following the 81-64 win over Southern Utah. The three of us, as well as some of our other Sun Devil Source staff members, are going to have a lot of ASU men's basketball coverage for you guys throughout the season. So make sure to let us know what you're liking in terms of coverage from us, what you want to see, if you want to see more podcast episodes talking about basketball. We appreciate everybody who tuned in to this episode, and to keep up with all of our coverage, sundevilsource.com, Sun Devil Source socials. We hope you all have a great rest of your day.